that was how to make the elixir of life and holy grail. Next up,
I'm a mortal, your source for all things immortal.
I'm Luigi Fontana. I'm a professor of medicine and nutrition at the University of Sydney and the Leonard P. Ullman Chair in Translational Metabolic Health, director of the Healthy Longevity Program, and a clinical academic at the Royal Prince Alfred Hospital. Before moving to Sydney, almost 3 years ago, I was a professor of medicine at Washington University in St. Louis in US, and the co-director of the longevity program. And I also had a joint appointment with the University of Brescia, where I was a professor of medicine.
Thank you so much for coming on, Luigi. To begin off, our podcast is called I'm Immortal, a little bit of a play on the word immortal. So, what does the word immortal or immortality mean to you?
Well, immortal means eternal life.
Mm-hmm. And is that all you feel? So, if you got the opportunity, would you like to be immortal?
We are immortal.
Oh.
what do you mean by that? Or immortal?
We mean that our physical life is just one of the many transitions that our body, our atoms that we are made of, they go through. It's like, if you see a piece of ice and you say, okay, because now it's getting warmer and the ice is melting, it doesn't exist anymore. No, it does exist. Transform into water and then into vapor. And then as a vapor and water, it goes somewhere else. It becomes a plant, an animal, a human, a cell, So it's an immortal transformation of energy and matter into different forms. So I think, we are immortal. It's a wrong perception of how the universe works.
Okay, yeah, that's a very creative answer. I don't think we've ever had an answer like that. Normally we follow this up with, would you want to be immortal? But I guess you don't really have a choice in this case, right? We're just atoms.
Yeah, we are immortal. It's just, again, is a wrong interpretation of how the universe works. And so I think, we are immortal.
Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to ask a quick question. Could you tell us a little bit about your journey towards becoming the director of longevity research program?
Yes. So look, I got my degree in medicine in Verona, in Italy, beautiful town in North Italy. I don't know if you ever been there. It's a fantastic.
Unfortunately not.
Yeah, beautiful old Roman. So you can see there is a Roman theater, and there is medieval buildings, beautiful. Anyway, I did my medicine there. Then I did my residency in internal medicine in Verona. I spent 1 year in London at King's College. And then I started my PhD in metabolism. And as I was practicing medicine as a specialist in internal medicine, I didn't like what I was doing. I said, I cannot do this job for the rest of my life. I cannot go in the emergency room and put some bandage on someone comes in, with a myocardial infarction or stroke or cancer, knowing that many of these diseases and the suffering linked with this disease are preventable. And so I said, look, I want to understand if we can prevent all this pain and discomfort and suffering and disability. And so I started to look into what we knew back in 2000, 2001, what was known about longevity and health. And the only data available were in animals. So we knew that, if you take animals, experimental animals, and you reduce calorie by 30, 40%, these animals live 50, 60% longer. Not only they live longer, but many of the chronic disease like cancer, cardiovascular, kidney, dementia, and many others are either totally prevented or hugely delayed. All these animals at any age, they are much younger metabolically and physiologically than the ad libitum fed, the animals that are eating ad libitum. And so it was really fascinating. Oh, fantastic. So there is a biological program that is working in mammals. So what about humans? And so I started to search And I found out, there was this professor at WashU, John Holody, one of my best friend, he just died 3 years ago, that was studying exercise and calorie restriction. So I wrote an email to him. I said, look, I'm interested in what you're doing. That's my interest. And he replied me back in a few days. I said, your interests are my interests. Why you don't join me? And so I made my luggage and I went to WashU and I stayed there for 17 years. And so I had this beautiful journey with him, where, we started to work on the effects of calorie restriction in humans, comparing calorie restriction with exercise. And then we moved into fasting, protein restriction, and quality of diet, Mediterranean diet, and stuff like that. So, just to dissect how nutrition and exercise are able to modulate some of these important molecular pathways, metabolic molecular pathways that are essential to health and longevity.
So as a follow-up question, because when I first heard of your research, in my head, it didn't make sense. Like, we're all built to, we want to eat more, and yet we live a shorter life. So is there a particular reason why calorie restriction ends up prolonging lifespan? Because logically, if you tell someone, it doesn't make any sense.
Right. Yeah. So basically, what we think is going on, because the phenomenon that calorie restriction without malnutrition, with all the vitamins and minerals, is extending lifespan, is very well known. And now we have data in monkeys. My studies in humans are strongly suggest many of the metabolic molecular preventative actions are also happening in humans. The question is why. So in nature, animals, and humans are animals, we are designed to procreate. Our main task is to transmit our genes so the species can go on. In nature, animals, they don't live long. As soon as they are middle-aged and they lose their strength, they are killed by other younger animals or some very normally harsh death. They don't live long. So basically, the job is to procreate. Because food is not always available in nature, there are times where there is scarcity, where there is a reduction because there is a flood, there is a drought, there is any natural phenomena, that can occur, the food is less. When food is less, basically, procreation is not possible. So one of the physiological functions that immediately stops when there is a food scarcity is reproduction. And what is interesting, what we are finding, basically, when food is scarce, these molecular pathways within our cells that are sensing how much food is available for growth and procreation, they shift into a maintenance, sort of a growth and reproduction into a maintenance. So basically, they keep the body younger. Why? Because the idea is that, when food is available again, your body is younger and so therefore can reproduce, has less DNA damage, less aging. It gives time for the body, to get food again for reproduction. If you take, animals on calorie restriction, a mice on average lives 2.5 years. Let's say you calorie restrict the animals for 2 years. And so chronologically, they are in menopause. But if you refeed them, if you start to feed them ad libitum, they are able to reproduce, even if chronologically they are in menopause. So basically, you are delaying the fertility period of life. So it's as powerful. I mean, the effect of this dietary restriction on physiology and metabolism and hormones is huge. It's a huge program. And that's the reason. The reason is that counterintuitively, you think, the more I eat, the stronger I am, and the longer I live. Instead of, it's the opposite, because within limit, because if you go below a certain level, then it's starvation and you're going to die. Or if you are eating an unhealthy diet, without all the vitamins and minerals, you're going to die. But, within limits, like 30, 40% restriction with all the nutrients, basically you are switching your cells from a growth and reproduction mode to a survival, protective maintenance mode. You are investing energy to keep your cells younger and more efficient.
Mm-hmm. So you just went through a lot of how eating less keeps you younger and healthier. So how is it that eating extra calories, eating excessive calories, how does that accelerate aging?
Well, there are several mechanisms, but the most important, so what we discovered in the last 15, 20 years is that there are certain pathways, and in particular, one that is called insulin IGF-1 pathway.
Mhm.
It is one of the most important ones. It's not the only one, because there are many that are working together. But, this insulin IGF-1 pathway, based on all the studies we did with genetic manipulation of some of these molecules along this pathway, and with drugs like rapamycin, we are able to extend lifespan in all model organisms that we have been studying. So the insulin IGF-1 pathway is a pathway that is stimulated by the binding of insulin and IGF-1 to the insulin receptor and the IGF-1 receptor. So why you have high insulin? You have high insulin when you are becoming insulin resistant. So if you have excess abdominal fat, these adipokines produced by these excessive abdominal fat are inhibiting the insulin signaling. And so you become technically what we call insulin resistant. And when you have peripheral insulin resistance, you have compensatory hyperinsulinemia. So the beta cells of the pancreas, they are producing more insulin to try to overcome the insulin resistance. And this excessive binding of insulin to the insulin receptor is triggering this insulin IGF-1 pathway. And the trigger of the insulin IGF-1 pathway by inhibiting FOXO translocation, for example, and activating mTOR is causing a reduction in DNA repair pathways, is inhibiting autophagy, is inhibiting antioxidant pathways like SO2 and catalases, is promoting cell proliferation, more random mutation, more cancer, more cell senescence, and is also inhibiting apoptosis. Apoptosis is a process where when there is a damage within your cell that it cannot be repaired, the cells goes in suicide. Okay, so that's what we are finding. Of course, this is the main one, but then there are other pathways like the Ig proteins, NFKB, MYC, and there are many other ones that are basically working together in keeping ourselves younger, more efficient, in getting rid of dysfunctional proteins, dysfunctional organelles, increasing DNA repair, antioxidant, and so on and so forth. And the beauty is that, only 50 years ago, we didn't know anything about it. We knew, calorie restriction was extending lifespan, but it was a black box. We didn't know why. And because of all these experiments by using animal models, simple model organisms, and rodent studies, by knocking down genes or overexpressing genes, now we have a clearer understanding of what's going on.
Okay, so now that you outlined one pathway for us, I don't think we need to go through all the pathways like you mentioned. There's many.
It was just an example of how
Right.
science, by using technology, has discovered the secret, the cellular mechanisms.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now that we know a little bit more about how a diet relates to longevity, and I think the current record right now for the longest someone has ever lived is like 122-ish.
Mhm.
So let's say you could start everyone on the ideal diet since they were a kid. How long do you anticipate like the maximum lifespan is with the ideal diet?
Well, we don't know, but let me put it this way. Based on several lines of research, including the homozygous twin studies, so twins that are genetically identical, we know that around 30%, 25% of your probability of living a longer or shorter life is due to the genes that you have inherited from your parents. Okay, so 75% is due to environmental factors. And even in centenarians, there are studies by Sebastiane Pearls at Tufts showing that 40% of the lifespan in centenarians is due to genes, and the rest is due to environmental factors. So let me put it this way. If you're born in a family where your parents are unlucky, and on an average lifestyle they live 65 years, if you're smoking, over drinking, if you're obese, not exercising, you're going to die when you're 50. If you do everything right, if you do everything good, probably you're going to make to 80, 85. But if you're born in the family of Calmet, the woman who died at 122, and she didn't do calorie restriction exercise, she was not doing anything, probably you can make, to 140, 150
Wow.
with her genes, with her,
Her
with her
genes.
genetic background. Instead of if you do everything wrong, if you're smoking and, taking drugs and probably you're going to die when you are 90.
Okay. Okay. So pretty much the rule is we should still aim to all be healthier, even if we're not Jean Clement.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like, it's like as Spinoza says, people, they think they are free. In reality, we are not free. There are certain constraints that are genetically determined. Even if mice, they live 2.5 years, they will never live 80 years, okay? Maybe, they're gonna become 4 years, 5 years, but not 80 years. Monkeys, rhesus monkeys, on average, they live 27 years. The longest lived monkey was a monkey nicknamed Sherman, who lived 44 years on calorie restriction. Okay,
Wow.
this is one of the monkeys of the NIA calorie restriction study, and she lived 44 years. If you do an equation, it's like 135 years for a human being. But I doubt that a rhesus monkey is going to live 80 years.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair.
Okay, so I'm gonna jump into a little bit of a demographic type of question. So various countries have various diets and various lifestyles. Which countries, as of now in 2021, are good lifestyle examples and have longer living populations due to diet and exercise?
Well, if you look at the data, the Japanese right now have the highest number of octogenarian, nonagenarian, centenarians in the world. Even if things are changing because the lifestyle in Japan has changed quite dramatically lately. I will say Japan, and then, Spain, Italy, and then, you have, Switzerland and Scandinavian countries. But, many of these improvements are due to major improvements in public health. We went from 45 years on average of lifespan in 1850 to 80 and 80 for men and 84 for women in 2020 in many developed countries. But this is because we drastically improved public health and hospital and medication. So we have a number of people that are living longer, but they are not living healthier. And US is a good example where, they spend a fortune. I think, the budget of NIH of health, it's like 3.3 trillions last year. They spent $3.3 trillion in health, and the results are poor. Basically the life expectancy of Americans is few years shorter than Italians or Japanese because of the super unhealthy lifestyle of many Americans, the epidemic of obesity that now is really appalling. 40% of men and women in certain states of US are obese. And if you put obesity and overweight, we are now close to 75%. It's a disaster. It's a disaster. In fact, in some counties, lifespan is going down for the first time in the last 50 years. Instead of increasing lifespan is coming down.
Oh, wait, can I ask, is the main reason lifespan is going down in some countries purely because of diet, or like what's the reason that we're seeing this change only now?
Because of the epidemic of obesity is increasing. If you look in 1980s, basically the number of obese and overweight people was a fraction of what it is now. So every year there is an increase in the number of obese and overweight people in US. So we think that obesity is a major driver of this phenomenon. There's an explosion of obesity in US. Obesity and all the other related, there is obesity, unhealthy food, and over drinking, smoking, and sedentary lifestyle. If you watch a movie of 1980s, and you look at the characters, they were much, much leaner than now. If you look at a movie now, you look at the people around, you can immediately see, that people were much leaner than they are now. And, I lived 17 years in US. If you go to the cafeteria of my university, that is one of the top medical school in US, is appalling the number of super obese individuals. It's normal. I was abnormal. I was the abnormal guy. The majority of people, they were, overweight, obese, super obese. It's terrible.
Okay, I know there's a lot of misconception, and you pointed out a bit earlier how the Mediterranean diet, it's looked up to as a good diet to possibly follow. But at the same time, I feel like, one, there's a lot of countries around the Mediterranean, and two, a lot of people have misconceptions like, oh, Italy, that means pizza. And they're like, no, that's not what it means. So could you sort of describe what an actual Mediterranean diet consists of that would help prolong longevity?
Look, I wrote a book called The Path to Longevity, where, I summarize, because, this is like 350 pages, so, to summarize in 1 hour, all this concept is going to be difficult. But let me try to answer your question. A Mediterranean diet, as you said, is just something that it's impalpable. What does it mean, a Mediterranean diet? As you said, there are 22 countries or 24 countries. And yes, they have some commonality if you compare the food of the Mediterranean countries compared to the food of Germany or England or Sweden, but is not mechanistic enough. The concept is that if you're eating less animal food, what is the typical Mediterranean diet? At least the one that Ansel Keys described in 1950 when he moved to Italy. So basically, the story is that this professor of Minnesota, Ansel Keys, was basically studying why in US, after World War II, there was a huge increase in myocardial infarction. There were a lot of young, middle-aged individuals who were dropping dead because of myocardial infarction. And they didn't know why. In 1950, we didn't know that, cholesterol, blood pressure, glucose, central obesity were risk factor for myocardial infarction. We didn't know that. And he met, with a guy, with an Italian professor at a conference in Rome of the food of the FAO, and he said, look, in Naples, we don't have myocardial infarction. I said, I don't believe it. Yeah, come and see me. So basically, he was lecturing in Scotland, or anyway, in UK, and he drove his car from UK to Naples, and then he spent many years there, and he studied the Mediterranean diet. And he found that basically, at that time in Naples, after World War II, people were eating meat once every 10, 15 days. Most of their diet was homemade, minimally processed bread and pasta. So with whole grains, not refined grains. Lots of legumes, lentils, chickpeas, fava beans, borlotti beans, navy beans, very, very beautifully done. My grandma is from South Italy, as I tell in my book. And so they were super expert in creating these very tasty recipes, full of flavor and spices and, with some olive oil. They were drinking, 1 glass of wine per meals. They were eating lots of vegetables and local fruits and some fish, nuts, seeds. So basically, this is the Mediterranean diet that Ansel Keys found to be linked with very low risk of cardiovascular disease. Basically, cardiovascular disease, myocardial infarction, stroke were unknown in Naples, after World War II. But as you said, the Okinawans that are not eating a Mediterranean diet, that were living in the Okinawa island, that basically south of Japan, they also had very low cardiovascular, cancer, diabetes, a stroke, and they had a higher number of centenarians in the same historical time. Because again, after World War II, the Americans, the occupied part of Okinawa, where still they have a military base, and they did basically, the doctors of the army, they did the survey, and they were basically looking at what the Okinawans were eating. And the Okinawans were eating a diet that was very rich in unrefined carbohydrates. Instead of wheat grains, the Okinawans, they were eating the sweet potatoes, the local sweet potatoes, very rich in, the purple one, all these, very rich in carotenoids. So basically carbohydrates from sweet potatoes was the staple food, with some tofu, soybeans, and legumes, lots of local vegetables, some fish. Meat was very rare, once in a while, local fruits. So this was the diet of the Okinawans. That is not a Mediterranean diet, but has the same principle. Very low animal products, some fish, lots of legumes, complex carbohydrates, not refined, not white sugar, white bread, white rice, but complex carbohydrates rich in phytochemicals and vitamins, some nuts and seeds. So that's the diet. Is only the diet? No, it's not only the diet. As I say in my book, diet is one of the component. Exercise is very important, and there are several mechanisms why exercise is acting on some of these longevity pathways, including the insulin pathway, and cognitive training, relationship. Even if you are super healthy and you eat, a healthy diet, but you live in a very bad environment with a lot of anger, a lot of bad emotions, this is detrimental for health. We know that depression and stuff, they increase inflammation, they have immune dysregulating effects, so it's a combination of factors. We have been studying diet, but there are other factors that are contributing to improve our health, both our physical, metabolic health, our emotional, creative, and intelligent self. Who cares, to live long if you are a nasty, angry, selfish, greedy human being?
Now that we mentioned it, I was reading your book, and one of the things you mentioned is with regards to the Okinawans was mental health, in terms of like they're not getting old together, right? They have a community there, because I think you mentioned like loneliness is a huge factor, right? You might live a long time, but like you said, if you're just this mean person who's lonely and just there's nothing good going on, that's terrible, and it affects your health as well. So this is a little bit of an aside, but are there any methods to help older people foster that same sort of sense of community to help them better their health together instead of just focusing individually?
Well, look, that's not my field of expertise. Okay, so
Sorry.
I'm not an expert of, but I've been living, in many countries. I've been living again, in Italy, Germany, UK, US, now Australia for 3 years. I've been traveling for conferences, for lectures all over the world. My understanding is that, of course, culture is very important. When you are born somewhere in a certain historical, cultural environment, you absorb, what is there, the dogmas, the values, because you see what your parents are doing. As you learn, how to speak Chinese or Japanese or Italian, you also absorb what are the conventions, the dogmas, the habits and stuff like that. And what I can see is that in Italy, in South Italy, as in Okinawa, families are very important. As you're born, the idea that, your parents and your brother and sisters, your cousins, your extended family is very important. There is this respect, this willingness, to live together, to support each other is very important. Instead of, for example, in this country, Australia, and when I was living in London, is the opposite. They are very individualistic. For example, believe it or not, I've been calling my mom, even if I'm living in Australia or US, every single day.
Wow.
For my entire life. And, we talk for half an hour, and maybe when I'm eating a dinner, stuff like that. When I was in London, and I told to my colleagues, that I was calling my mom every day, say, are you crazy? I call my mom twice a year. And sometimes if I tell her, may I come home? She tells me, no, I have to play bridge. You cannot come. And that's one of the reasons why in this country, in Australia, the number of people with mental disease is huge. In Australia, there is a Ministry of Health and there is a Ministry of Mental Health. The number of people who are abusing with alcohol and drugs is huge in this country. There is this obsession with getting drunk, with getting wasted. And I think that one of the components of these mental emotional issues that is very common in these kind of Anglo-Saxon countries, North European countries, and less so in India, South Europe, Asia, Japan, is, even if Japan is getting worse, because, they are living in these packed towns with too many people, but, let's talk the traditional Japan, where we're living in a more, nice environment in the countryside, is that basically there is this very extroverted relationship with other people, caring of other people, and supportive. Instead of, these societies, they are very individualistic, very selfish, even within the family. So basically, you cannot count on your parents. You don't have this emotional bondage where, when you have problems, and in life we have problems, you cannot talk with your mom and father in a freely way. And so basically you're alone. You are left alone since you're a kid. You don't have an emotional support. You cannot count on someone you love, and they love you, and they love you. And I think, this has huge emotional consequences, and has a huge emotional and lifestyle consequences that go very well beyond the metabolic physical health.
Since we're on the topic of mental health, I just wanted to ask this very quickly. I know a lot of these mental health issues like depression or anxiety, they cause you to not live life in a healthy lifestyle, whether that's having the motivation to get up and go exercise or get up and make yourself a healthy meal. So how is it that these psychological stresses, how do they impact how we deal with our metabolism and our immune system?
Look, this is a very question. Again, I'm not an expert. I've been reading a lot about it, but, our understanding of how mental health and emotional health is impacting our metabolic health, inflammation, immune system is very rudimental. There are a number of new studies, but they are very, very, very limited, and I'm a doctor and I'm teaching a university to medical students. And unfortunately, as I told you, I've been teaching and working in Europe, in US, now in Australia, and everywhere. Unfortunately, the focus is on treating diseases, not preventing diseases. You go through medical school with almost zero teaching about, how lifestyle are mechanistically important for preventing diseases. There is no mention about emotional health, and as you said, the consequences. So if you are emotional unwell, how can you basically take care of yourself?
Yeah.
If you're wasted, mentally, and then you of course, the only way you can cope with your life is to drink or take drugs or becoming, obsessed with something, can be video game, can be anything. And then, instead of using your energy to invest to stay healthier, enjoy life, enjoy your friends, your family, investing your energy in creating something, painting, writing, poetry, music, you waste your time in front of a whiskey or a bottle of wine or a beer or cocaine or whatever, basically, or Facebook, by watching for hours what other people post. Is a problem. It's a big problem. But I think, our society is not ready yet, to understand that what people do and the education is super important. So going back, to the analogy, right now, all the medical systems is most of the medical system is concentrated in treating diseases, not preventing them. Let me make an analogy. Let's say you buy a new car. Okay, now you go to one of these shop and you say, okay, I'm buying a new Ferrari or a new Mercedes. And let's suppose that, the guy who sells the car doesn't give you any instruction on how to take care of the car. So he doesn't tell you that, every 5,000 or 10,000 kilometers, you have to change your oil. Doesn't tell you that, you have to change your tires. Doesn't change that you have to change your brake pads. Nothing. So you start to drive this car happily, and the car it's working beautifully because it's new. But you have to be a genius to understand that if you don't do anything, probably around 20, 25,000 K, your car is gonna die. Or because, the oil is gone and basically the engine is gonna be destroyed, or because, your tires are bald and, there is some rain and you're gonna basically lose control and you're gonna, or your brake pads or whatever, you know what I mean? Instead of, if you take good care of your car, your Mercedes can easily last 300,000 kilometers instead of 30,000 kilometers. And that's exactly what's happening in our society. People have no clue about what they have to do to keep their body healthy. There is no education. You go through primary, secondary, university, and there is nothing. They teach us everything about coding, math, algebra, calculus, poets, grammar, but nothing about what I'm telling in my book. So basically, what are the mechanisms driving aging, how exercise, different type of exercise, different type of nutrition, calories, and, mindfulness act on many metabolic, molecular, and other pathways? Nothing. You think it's normal in a society that the most important education, that is, first of all, how can you stay healthy? How can you improve your emotional health? How can you improve your intuitive, creative health? Is not a key subject that should be taught in primary, secondary, and tertiary school. So some of my colleagues and some of people I know, they say, yes, well, people, they will never change their lifestyle. I like my food. What does it mean, I like my food? You are Indian, from what I can see, isn't it?
I'm Bengali, yeah.
Yeah. So what you like is not what I like, because you are born, where, your mom was preparing, the dal, very spicy, with certain spices that are very friendly to you, and you love
My
them because
palate is different. Yeah.
yeah. And instead of, if you're born in England or if you're born in Japan, the type of food is completely different. So the taste is not something that is something that, you are born with, because, there is even emotional, linkage, with your infancy, your mother, your parents, your traditions. So I think that probably, that, there is no education. It's like if you say to my kid, do you prefer to play on your games or your PlayStation, or you prefer to go to school? You know the answer. If you let him free, probably he's going to go to school twice a week, and then he's going to stay in front of the TV all day long.
Yeah.
But instead, what we do, we force them to go to school. They have to go to school, and step by step, eventually they become engineers, doctors, lawyers, because step by step, day by day, in 15, 18 years of education, they build that knowledge that allows them to design an airplane, to design, an iPhone, and you know what I mean? But if you let them play all day long, what is going to happen? Nothing. They're going to become ignorant. They're going to stay ignorant. So it's the same concept. I think if people, they were slowly educated about health and how to eat healthy and how to exercise, use their mindfulness and other stuff, to become better human being, healthier human being, then this is going to become part of it's going to become like second nature.
I know we don't want to keep you too long today, and that seems like the overall message of today's podcast seems very clear. But because what you're talking about is a larger societal problem, right? Like, we've normalized unhealthiness almost, in a sense. But for someone who wants to take control of their life today, whether it be diet or exercise, is there a recommended way to sort of get them into this healthy habit and for them to stick on it for the rest of their life?
Yes, as I said, there are a number of interventions. There is not another problem with our current society. People, they look for a magic fix. Give me something. Give me one thing. One day is the paleo, one day is the 5-2 diet, the other day is going to be the ketogenic diet, and then, this and that, But in reality, It's like if you ask me, can you give me like a easy way to become a doctor? Just something simple. Give me like a booklet, give me like, one maximum 50 pages that explains me how to become a good doctor. Can you give me like a 50 pages book, how to become an engineer?
Mhm.
Are you crazy? Are you kidding me? So that's, another problem. We are living in a society where people, they want some magic fix. And there are, unfortunately, a lot of people out there that are selling. Don't worry, we're going to find a pill for you. A pill that is going to mimic calorie restriction, or it's going to do mimic exercise and stuff like that. Don't
Mhm.
worry. Keep doing your crazy life. And then, we're going to give you something. No, I'm sorry. Doesn't work like that. Because even if in principle, as we said, we can find some drugs that are going to mimic calorie restriction, I don't believe in that. I think, that maybe some drugs can potentiate the effects of healthy lifestyle, but they cannot substitute a healthy lifestyle. But what about emotional health? As we said before, what about spirituality? Do you want to create a pill? Who wants to live a dull, selfish, lonely life and live maybe 90 years, 100 years as a selfish, greedy, lonely person? What's the point? That's life? I don't believe so. At least that's my point of view.
Yeah.
Life is just basically a beautiful journey where we can explore ourselves, we can explore the worlds, make friends, encounter people, see beautiful stuff, create something, music, art, poetry. We can do a lot of fantastic stuff, live our lives. If we are healthier, physically, metabolically, psychologically, spiritually, we're going to be in a better place to enjoy this journey than just living immortally a boring, selfish, greedy, environmental, destructive life. So I try to summarize this concept in my book. As I said, it's called The Path to Longevity, where I tried, to describe what I think. It's my point of view. I understand, I don't know everything, but I've been working in this field for the last 30 years. If I put together, my MD and specialization and my research, basically is almost 34 years that I've been working in this field. And not only scientifically, but as a human being, I'm interested in the whole idea of health. So basically, not only metabolic health, but also, again, I said, emotional, spiritual, creative health, environmental health. A lot of people, they don't understand. Let's assume that, there's going to be a drug for each disease. So where are all the metabolites of these drugs? Where they're going to end up? So people, do they realize that, when they take chemotherapeutic agents and antidepressant, they pee and poop these metabolites, and they end up in their river, in their fish. There are experiments showing that, you can find metabolites of antidepressants, anti-inflammatory, chemotherapeutic agents in their fish they're eating, in the food they're eating. So if billions of people, they are taking medications, we are destroying this environment. In 70 years, we have destroyed this environment. We are destroying forests. We are polluting the oceans. We are destroying the topsoil just because we are greedy. Can you imagine 7 billion people eating meat 3 times a week? What it's going to do for the planet?
Mhm. Absolutely. So, if someone's a student or somebody who's very excited to get involved in this field, what can they do to get involved in the field that you're an expert in? How do they start?
Look, probably they have to start like how I did, basically is first of all to understand, what they love, what they are really interested in. Like, when I was a 27 years old resident in internal medicine, I said, look, I cannot do this job for the rest of my life. What are my interests? So I spent time to understand what I was really interested in.
Mhm.
And then I started to search. I said, who is working in this field? Who is the best? Who is the guy who is really doing advanced science in this field? I started to search. I found, it took probably 6 months, 8 months to find out that this John Holliday existed. I sent emails around, said, who is working on this field? And then, Richard Binder, okay, is one of the top guy in calorie restriction in mice, told me, look, I'm working in mice and monkeys. If you want to work on humans, there is my friend in St. Louis, John Holliday. Write to him. I wrote to him and I went there. And then, because I had a passion to understand this one, I started to do my research. I started to think because, John Holliday, what he taught me is to think independently. So the good thing of having a good mentor is that, he allows you to think independently, to start to process, to don't believe dogmas, but, to challenge, what people think is the truth and challenge the truth and come up with your own ideas, test your ideas and progress.
Okay, well, we won't keep you any further, Luigi, since I know you've discussed a lot today.
Yes.
So, right, for any of you guys listening, Dr. Fontana, Luigi's book will be in the description below. Path to Longevity. I think you had the quote in there about reaching 100 as if you're with the health of a 40-year-old. So definitely read that. Once again, Luigi, thank you for coming on the podcast. This is I'm Immortal, your source for all things immortal. And we really appreciate you coming on to take the time to speak with us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on.